Hey there, I am Sinead Donovan, former President of Chartered Accountants Ireland, and over the last year I have been proud to be host of Difference Makers Discuss, along with some guest hosts when I let them. Difference Makers Discuss is a webinar series, and we got to meet and interview difference makers, people making a mark not only in the field of chartered accountancy, but throughout society as a whole. I have loved it, and I wanted to bring to you here a few snippets of the action in the last year. Last October, I was delighted to meet Thembeke Maseko, an inspiring finance leader at Standard Bank South Africa. Thembeke has had an incredible journey, from a challenging childhood in Cape Town to professional success, which highlights the power of resilience, education and mentorship. Here, she talks about how her grandfather essentially tricked her into getting the best education possible.
He was a very intelligent man because, in addition to that, to him selling this dream to me, he said to me that, I actually would have loved to be educated, but I didn't get a chance to. So when you go to school, you must learn so you can come home and teach me. This is how I'm going to get educated. And unknowing to me at the time, what I didn't know is the skills that he was actually instilling in me while going to school. Because now when I got to school, I had to make sure that I focus, I listen, because I was not there to learn for myself. I had a bigger picture to live for. I was getting an education for me and my grandfather. I knew that when I made sure that I understand things, when I get home, I have an opportunity to be a teacher to him. And secondly, it was, he was teaching me the art of storytelling. And little did I know that later on in life, actually that's a rare skill, and that people actually would pay lots of money to get that skill. And he was actually crafting this journey for me, even though he didn't quite know where I was going to end. But looking back now, I wish he was here to actually see that.
Thembeke was a fascinating guest and a testament to determination, ambition, heart, and the absolute belief that anything is possible. In November, I was lucky to have spoken to Michelle Shuttleworth, a trailblazer in finance and a passionate advocate for purpose-driven work. Her impressive and dynamic career spans top companies like PwC, Virgin Entertainment, Burberry, and the BBC. Here she is giving a peek inside the British national broadcaster.
And I went over to work for BBC Radio and look after the finances there under who is now the DG, Tim Davey, who actually is a marketeer by trade. And he was a fantastic boss to have because he just had a very different perspective about how these things should run. He wasn't a BBC lifer. He hadn't grown up in broadcasting, unlike many of the others who were in leadership there. So that was really refreshing, and I learned a lot from him. And then I had another baby. And many of my jobs are punctuated with children in one way, shape or form. So I came back from my maternity leave with my second into a big finance transformation program. So we were doing some changes both to systems and to structures across the BBC and the finance team. And I led a part of that, looking at management information and analytics. And it was great because it got me out across the country, visiting teams in all sorts of places, looking at how we would make the financial information better and provide more information to people on the ground, so people could, use systems to put their own numbers in, and it would make finance more focused on partnering than just on producing numbers. So there was an interesting set of change programs there, and off the back of that, I then became finance director of the non-broadcast stuff at the BBC. So all of the technology and procurement activity, and finance itself and HR and others. So anything that was non-broadcast, I looked after. And it's what I loved about the BBC, in addition to just having a fantastic team, was, and still is, the fact that I referenced that sort of governance and funding model of the BBC frequently in work, because it has a very interesting public-private almost dimension to it, you know, this very relatively fixed income base from a license fee that is not that malleable. But your focus can be around costs and delivering value, and actually then how you report and present success in that is really challenging. And so lots of the stuff that I'm doing with certainly the CRIC now, but also with charities, really picks up on that, because you know, you may have some commercial activity in a separate arm or whatever it may be that can give you back some income, but your core mission delivery is all about how you take a pound and deliver the most value from that pound that you possibly can.
Michelle is currently CFO at the Francis Crick Institute. But as if that wasn't enough, she also runs her own sustainable kids' clothing company called Boa Wool. Check it out. In season 2, I reluctantly handed over the reins to some guest hosts. This next clip features the impressive Ainsley van Onselen, who interviewed Jessica Fries, the executive chair of A4S, or Accounting for Sustainability, for a special edition about the role of chartered accountants in sustainability.
Firstly, it is using its influence to help make sure that the frameworks, the standards, the regulations that are being put in place quite rapidly now are going to drive meaningful progress and action, and really create that that baseline of information upon which decisions have to be built. If I think of the work we do with investors, they really want to see that information being disclosed so that they can decide where they're going to be investing. And a lot of them have made net zero commitments, or commitments around some of the social outcomes or broader environmental outcomes that they see as critical to the investments that they are taking. And so I think that enabling that flow of information is key. And of course, accountants have huge skills when it comes to enabling to looking at the kind of controls that are in place, looking at the systems, looking at making sure that the information that gets disclosed is robust and is underpinned. And then, of course, those who are in practice providing that advice to companies. But I would say as well, one of the things that a lot of the accountants we work with also talk about is the fact that you know, particularly accountants in business are often the ones holding the purse strings. Yes. But also, from an advisory nature, those in practice provide advice, strategic advice, often to organisations. So again, this isn't just about the reporting, but really thinking about you know, key investment decisions that might be being made now. So how can accountants really help to make sure that the analysis that's being undertaken really takes into account that full set of information, all of the different capitals that an organisation relies on, not just financial.
It certainly feels, I think, from a global perspective, that the world has sort of woken up from its chrysalis almost, and there is, I think, a sense of agency and a sense of urgency to this issue. And chartered accountants, obviously, they're very good at ensuring that there's consistent, reliable, accurate data that can be measured sort of on an even playing field. So there's certainly a role there to play to not only, as you say, do the preparing and the reporting, but also to advocate to the stakeholders that they influence, particularly in respect to strategic decisions from the ground up. So I definitely agree with that. In terms of what are you seeing as some of the key sort of global international trends or developments that chartered accountants should be aware of? Is there anything that you want to add there?
Well, we've touched quite a bit on the reporting side of things. I think two other trends that are really key. One is around the whole discussion of transition planning and transition finance. So a lot of organisations and indeed governments have set net zero goals.
Yes.
And there's a huge role that the profession can play in helping, whether it's organisations or indeed nations, to translate those goals into action. And that is particularly the measurement side of things. So how do you go from what can be a very long-term target embedded into the strategy, into the financial planning processes, and also setting near-term goals. So we find that the accounting community has a vital role to play in making some of these commitments real.
I think you'll agree that episode was superb and highlighted the critical issue facing us in sustainability. I personally am delighted to see entities like A4S trying to normalise sustainable business across the globe. Next up, we have a clip from the amazing and charismatic Tinashe Kamangara, a natural leader within the profession. I was lucky enough to meet with Tinashe face to face when I was in Australia, and it is fair to say he is an absolute ambassador for the profession and what people can achieve at all stages of their career. Tinashe is a past president of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand and a director at Deloitte. Tinashe spoke to me about attracting new and diverse people to the chartered accountancy profession.
Yeah, so the decision is really based around that attractiveness piece, right? We're trying to attract more people to our profession. And, when we sit around the board table, it's about how can we do that? And, there's multiple things that we're doing, whether it's campaigns at the cinemas, for example, but also, this pathway has actually always existed in Australia and New Zealand. It's just that we probably hadn't highlighted it initially. And we recognize that our pathway actually took too long, right? So this new pathway that we announced, which, inevitably, because Australia and New Zealand, most people come through that business commerce degree pathway. I think rightly so, a lot of members were a little bit surprised initially. But when you start talking to our members about, the challenges that we're facing, they're much, much more understanding. So, 10 years ago, 83% of students finished high school in Australia. That's down to 73% today. So the people going into university, there are less people going into universities. And even the universities themselves are changing the pathways for people to come into the universities, right? So they're giving places to students while they're still in school, for example. They're not waiting until the results have been released. So there's this pipeline issue of people coming into the profession. And, I've been fortunate to go to a few schools to talk to them about accounting recently. I went to one school in a lower socioeconomic area in Western Australia. And, the teacher said, out of all the students doing the year 12, less than a third of those students would even consider or choose to go to university. Right. So from a professional perspective, if we can give some of these students the opportunity to earn and learn, for example, that gives them more of an opportunity, like I've said before, to give them the same opportunities that I've had as a chartered accountant and the same opportunities that you've had to work with some great people, great clients, to travel, and just to enjoy the benefits of being a chartered accountant in this world.
I absolutely loved talking to Tinashe. His journey from Zimbabwe to Perth and on to parenthood is so full on and inspiring. Finally, these next couple of clips are from a special edition hosted by D France in association with the Resilience Institute, which was broadcast in January. D is the head of the Wellbeing Hub here in Chartered Accountants Ireland, and is a true champion for mental well-being and the need for resilience. First up, we hear Brad Hook talk about multitasking. Then Declan Scott shares a few truths about sleep.
So I think it's obviously important to look at the challenges within the profession and the challenges that came up in the study itself. Multitasking, hypervigilance and poor sleep quality were defined as challenges. So maybe, Brad, you could just share a couple of examples of how these would actually impact the day-to-day performance and well-being of the accountants that are out there and listening today.
Absolutely. So I come from a family of accountants and I've seen this firsthand. I'm still surprised when job ads say multitasking is required. The research shows quite clearly that multitasking, for example, it rapidly drains our cognitive resources. It gives the illusion of productivity, but if you find yourself at the end of the day feeling completely exhausted, it's a real call to action to ask yourself, was I multitasking? Some research suggests that if I'm working on 5 tasks simultaneously, 5 threads simultaneously, I lose about 80% of my time to what's called context switching. We're not actually running the tasks simultaneously. We're jumping from one to the other to the other. A far more effective habit is monotasking, which is just focusing on one thing through to completion, potentially stepping back, taking a short break. It can be a micro break of 10 seconds or 1 minute if you can afford that, and just recalibrating and then stepping into the next task. These types of rhythms of resilience can make a huge difference. Hypervigilance is the state of being constantly switched on. And it's a real challenge, especially in those last few hours before bed. Have you ever found yourself going to bed and then checking the phone one more time just to see if anything interesting came through? I often say in my workshops, I don't think anyone has received an email in the last half hour before bed that actually helped them to sleep better. Yet we practice these habits.
So why is sleep such a critical factor for resilience, and how can professionals improve their own sleep habits? So maybe Declan, you could answer that one for us.
Yeah, it's this particular topic is fascinating, and I've had the good fortune of working with many industries now and many companies, just focusing on sleep. There's so much more to it than ever I imagined, and in our work we reference experts like Matthew Walker, great book called Why We Sleep, and he's a number of great resources online for people to follow up with, but. What I never realized when I was in the working world at that time is that it was very ad hoc. It was never there was never rhythm in it. And if we look at our life, we live in rhythm. Nature follows a rhythm. The seasons, days, the hours, day and night, it's all in rhythm. And every animal, every mammal follows a rhythm. And yet, as human beings, we have the audacity to think we don't need to. And in some cases, certainly in the past, it was like, oh, I can do it on 4 hours a night and I don't need. And that was seen as a bravado sign that, I'm Superman or woman. And so, when I really cottoned on to this and started to have some rhythm in my own sleep, it changed my life. And, to use an analogy, it's like you're working in your job and you're never doing a backup of anything. You're never consolidating the files. You're never, culling the files. You're not even thinking about having a backup storage facility or anything like that. The sleep in itself does consolidate and even bring forward some of that creativity we need. It's an important, that phrase, sleep on it. Well, it actually does. You do start to think laterally during the night. That's where some of your best ideas may come after having a night's sleep. And then using that fresh energy and appreciating the rhythm of the day. Many of us, will waste valuable time when our energy is high in the morning. That's when we come in and we do our aimless scrolling or look at our emails, and that's your most productive time of the day. When you follow your circadian cycle of 24 hours and see, actually, the afternoon, by nature, we're going to be losing energy, and we shouldn't be going into critical performance reviews or meetings at that time in the evening. We are not at our best.
So I think you'll agree that's a pretty impressive roster of guests we've had on Difference Makers discuss. And that's just season 2. So I would urge you to maybe listen back or watch back on these episodes and all from season 1, wherever you are getting this now. Please look out for future episodes where we meet some more difference makers, people who've positively impacted communities worldwide. And finally, the words I have wanted to say since seeing my first YouTuber. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you soon.